Next question. Talked about the canoe.
Uh-oh.
Canoe paddle.
Right.
Do you like a wide one or a beaver tail one?
Well, I use both
Okay.
and have both.
What's the situation that you choose?
Okay. I actually prefer, and my favorite paddle is wide, flat across the bottom, straight, and has a T handle. Because I have more control over that handle, going rocks, logs, curves, and there is fast water on creeks, you know. So I've got more control because by simply turning your wrist and changing the angle of that blade, you can make that canoe do things that you want it to without having to take a paddle out of water. Because anytime you take a paddle out of the water, you're not controlling the paddle. Anytime the current is moving faster than you are paddling, you're not controlling the canoe. So that's what I prefer. But now, when I was in the boundary waters, I used about a 5.5 foot beaver paddle with standard handle because I was primarily on lakes unless I was portaging. And when you portage, you ain't paddling.
Nope.
You're toting.
Now, do you like to do the J stroke or the Indian stroke?
I don't have a preference. I do what's called for at that particular time. Yeah, and that's like sculling. Taking the paddle against your arm and holding over the side and cutting a figure 8 with a blade. Instead of paddling backwards, I will do that because I have more control over the stern of the canoe than I do trying to paddle backwards. If I'm in a john boat, and I love a john boat, I had a really good 16-footer, and I have my notches back there and an oar, and I scull, and I can scull and make that boat move against anything. And of course I grew up with that, and it's simply doing your wrist like this, and you're making the blade do a figure 8 like that, which is a propeller. And that's the same stroke that the gondoliers in Italy use, and what have you. It's been around a long, long time.
I learned to do
but
it.
A lot of people don't know it.
Where, of course, it was a full-length paddle. We did have short sculling paddles, but I learned it with a short paddle because I was such a little bitty kid. I didn't have a whole lot of upper body strength. And when you got into torque, I just didn't have it. But I would put the head of the paddle into the armpit and reach down and grab a hold, and learn to do it that way, where I'm keeping it jammed in the armpit. And the bigger the 8, the more propulsion you had, and you could do a little 8 on this side and a big 8 on that side to push you this way. You could reverse it and do a big 8 on this side to make it want to go straight. It was just how wide you made the sides of the 8, and if you made a small tight 8, you could maneuver, but you didn't go around a whole lot. You didn't have much speed, but get in there and real gently just do a nice lazy little move. And that, we didn't have a trolling motor. You learned how to cane fish out of a boat doing that, you know.
Hold it in place.
Hold it in place against the current.
Well, I always carried 3 paddles. Carried my T handle. Then I carried a beaver tail about the same length. That was my spare. Lashed it to the gunnels. And then I carried a short paddle this long, and I had a hole drill at the top and an idiot cord on it, and I would tie it to the stern of the canoe, because a lot of times in brush, what have you, you're doing that and you look up and there could be a wasp nest or a water moccasin, and you drop that paddle. Well, it's only going to go the length of that cord from the canoe, because I am moving away from that point rapidly. And then if the wasp nest gets really rambunctious, those great big red, what we
red
call
wasps,
guinea wasps.
Oh yeah.
That's why you have tied your stuff in, because I turn that canoe over and I swim at the shore, breathing in the air, and you can hear the wasps pinging against it
Yeah.
till you get out of range.
Yeah.
I've had to do that a time or two.
Mm-hmm.
And about the only thing I'd lose would be my gallon bucket, a 3-gallon bucket with the sand in it. And I could find that floating in a little bit.
I was in some fairly rough current one time. The river was running low, and we were on Choctawhatchee River. And there was an old railroad trestle that you never see at normal water level. It's where they'd come in, they'd cut the poles off.
Sure.
But it was back in the days when you were running trains for timber work. And water was low enough, them things were sticking up out of the water. And I didn't see one. I thought that it was missing. And so I went around this one, and when I went to go over that one, it was at water level. And so that tipped me. I wasn't ready for it because glare on the water, glare on the sun, I couldn't see it. And it wasn't a hole when it sheared off or something. And I hit it and it flipped me over in that pretty good current. And when I went under and I rolled back up, I came up under the canoe. And my first instinct was to get out from under it, but like I'm saying, it trapped air. And I realized that I could guide the canoe from down here, and if I got out, this thing's going to turn sideways on that rock coming up, and that's going to be the end of that canoe.
Yeah.
And so I just grabbed a hold of the thing, and I'm in air, and you know, because the light, I can see the bottom. And I just eased the canoe along and guided it through that thing. When I got out into the flat again, that's when I came back out and got up on the sandbar and drained her out. But the guys that was with me, they saw me go ahead, and they saw me roll over, and then I didn't come up, and they were getting nervous. But then one of them pointed out and said, his canoe is maneuvering. You know, it wasn't floating, it was actually making turns. I bumped at one point and had to back up and go this way. And they figured out, and he said, what is that, the submarine maneuver or what? It's, no, it's called doing what you got to do in the moment. But it's amazing how much air you can trap under a canoe. You got at least probably 2 minutes of air.
Today, a decent compass
Mm-hmm.
is so inexpensive.
Mm-hmm.
I am constantly amazed at the people who go in the national forests and national parks
Mm-hmm.
and go wandering do not have one.
Yeah.
You take Moses.
Mm-hmm.
If he'd have known his ass from his elbow,
Yeah.
instead of wandering 40 years out there,
Mm-hmm.
he could have broken out his compass, and 2 weeks later, he would have been across the border, and we wouldn't have all them damn wars going on over there.
Yeah. Yeah, the one nation that doesn't have oil. But now I learned from my uncle who was a Marine. I told you about him, that he taught me how to nail a compass.
Mm-hmm.
Of taking and making sure how sensitive the compass was, because they're all being made, but not all of them are made the same. And
Right.
especially back in the day when they used to just put that magnetic paint on one end of something, and etc. And so some of them were really sensitive, and some of them were not. And I had a Kaminga at one time that I'd acquired from somebody, and you could put a bayonet upside that thing and it wouldn't turn. It just did not. How this came through, I don't know. And on the other hand, I had like you're talking about, a relatively cheap compass. But you could get a knife or something, you could get 8 inches out, and you could make the needle move. It was that sensitive.
A Boy Scout or a Girl Scout plastic compass
Mm-hmm.
with a revolving dial,
Mm-hmm.
and on the side it's got 2 measurements,
Mm-hmm.
$15,
Mm-hmm.
will take you anywhere in the world you want to go.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, and I'm serious. You know, in my rucksack that I have up there, my little day sack,
Mm-hmm.
everything that I've got in there was geared into me being comfortable and staying alive when the world went to hell. I had 3 of those space blankets in there. They don't take up room.
Mm-hmm.
They'll do a thing. I had the fire starter
Mm-hmm.
where you can scrape it.
Mm-hmm.
I had Bic lighter,
Mm-hmm.
and I had emergency matches, and I had a candle.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you got to dry wood out, you can light a candle and hold it over it
Mm-hmm.
a lot longer than you can go shh, shh.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
True.
A lot of it came about through trial and error.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it came through knowledge passed from foresters,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of it came out of very good books.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you pan the room,
Mm-hmm.
the first barrister case is the American Indian, primarily in the South,
Mm-hmm.
the whole case.
Mm-hmm.
The second case is the American War between the states.
Mm-hmm.
The third barrister case is all the colonies prior to 1800,
Mm-hmm.
actually prior to 1770.
Mm-hmm.
The next case is 1770 up to about 1840.
Mm-hmm.
The next big barrister case, all of them are 4 high,
Mm-hmm.
is all Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
And then the back shelf, that's all the United States Marine Corps or the Army on there, is where the Marines and the Army were fighting together.
Mm-hmm.
And then first bookshelf is survival, second bookshelf is miscellaneous,
Mm-hmm.
first rack of guns is hunting rifles, second rack of guns starts with the United States Marine Corps long gun in the 1800s,
Mm-hmm.
ends with the M14, and then some very good foreign rifles.
Mm-hmm.
And then behind me is a rack of flintlocks, and then the cap locks are all Civil War era.
Mm-hmm. And then you got the rack of all the bayonets.
Yeah,
and
these
blades.
are bayonets and knives that go with it. It's just amazing how many of them have a value now.
Well, you've been collecting for quite a while.
Since,
Now, your granddaddy was a Marine,
well,
right?
my daddy was a Marine.
Your daddy was a Marine. 'Cause I
All
think-
my brothers were Marines,
Right.
and 2 of my sons were Marines.
Because I recall you said something about it was your dad that brought home coins to you.
Yeah.
For when he deployed, and you kept with that, and you added to that coin collection.
Let me see if it's in here. No, it's in the other knife rack over there. Dad took a bayonet during World War II in Okinawa.
Uh-huh.
A lot of hand-to-hand fighting.
Mm-hmm.
Filed it down to this long, and it was an Arkansas toothpick.
Mm-hmm.
It came to a needle,
Mm-hmm.
and that was if a Jap crawled in,
Mm-hmm.
it would get through web gear, it would get through leather gear,
Mm-hmm.
and he could still get into the soft underbelly, or coming up, he could get that rib cage.
Mm-hmm.
My father had fought at Guadalcanal, Peleliu,
Mm-hmm.
and then Okinawa,
Mm-hmm.
and he knew which way was up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's the documentaries that I watch now, like Any Idea, World War II and stuff, where they go in depth. I had a working knowledge of them battles, but seeing the in-depth of what all went on in those campaigns, the why we were there. Why did you have to take this island? Well, we could fly B-29s there, but they got shot up and they needed a place to land on the way back.
That was Iwo
That
Jima and
was Iwo.
Tarawa. Yeah.
So they went and took them. Did we really need it? We could have bypassed it, except it had an air base, and Howard had a runway on it. And if we took it, the B-29s could land.
Over 1,000 B-29s shot up, landed at Iwo Jima,
Mm-hmm.
and the crews were not lost at sea.
Yep. The first one, they were still fighting the Battle of the Island. They got shot up and came in anyway.
Right, they
And
came
landed.
in and landed, and just fortunately, the Marines had the airfield,
Mm-hmm.
because Iwo Jima lasted 36 days, and 27,500 men died on that island in 36 days.
Mm-hmm.
It was bloody. It was a hard-fought battle.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like they made the TV series. Tom Hanks and them did a great job.
Band of Brothers.
Band of Brothers. And they followed this unit all the way through their training from Fort Mims, Georgia,
Mm-hmm.
through the end of World War II.
Mhm.
One unit. They could not do that with the Marine Corps.
Mm-hmm.
When they did the Pacific, the Marine Corps, for instance, this mortar platoon, a
Mm-hmm.
young man from Mobile who wrote the 2 books about the war in the Pacific. When Peleliu was over, his whole unit only had 22 men left.
Mm-hmm.
So the people that started that battle, nobody was there at the end.
Mm-hmm.
When Okinawa was over, he had 11 men left.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them were wounded.
Mm-hmm.
And when they came down and told them that the atomic bomb had been dropped at Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the Japanese had surrendered, nobody cheered or anything. They just sat on their racks in a daze and thought, I'm going to live.
Mm-hmm.
Because Okinawa was very bloody.
Mm-hmm.
One of the bronzes I have over there is PFC Orr. He was 27 years old. He was a company runner, never got wounded, running in the open from unit to unit the whole Battle of Okinawa.
Mm-hmm.
And they got a picture of him, and it's so gung-ho that, you know, it survived today. I've got a actual photograph, too, of Orr and his signature on it. But the Army several times has taken that picture and put on their training manual till somebody pointed out, you have got a picture of Marine on there, you know.
Yeah.
Right. They had it one time on the 2nd Infantry Division training manual.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But it's a good picture.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And it's a good bronze statue. Well, one of my favorite is machine gunner with a gun over his shoulder if a gun's up, because I started out as a gunner.
Mm-hmm.
And because I was little, I made a small target.
You get behind the gun.
5 foot 1.5, 116 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
32-pound gun on my shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
Because a gunner, even though the A gunner's supposed to carry it, gunner carries his gun.
Yeah. Well, now that was the thing when my uncle had went into World War II. He toted the base plate.
Oh yeah.
That 80-something pound base plate.
Right.
So he was not recruited for his looks. You know, he had enlisted. He was coming out of basic whenever World War II happened. He thought we were going to get in a fight, and that's the reason he went and enlisted. And he was demonstrating just how big and bullish and strong he was, and etc. And his sergeant, his gunnery, said, "Come with me a second, boy," and walked him down a couple of buildings, and there was this big, huge plate leaning there. He said, "Pick that up, hold it up over your head. Now I want you to do 5 squats, do this, do that." And he was bragging. He said, "I'll tell you what, if you can do it, I'll buy you a beer." He did all of it. Congratulations. Well, guess where he got assigned?
Yeah, he was
Mortar.
81. But think of the guy carrying a 6-foot-long steel tube.
Yeah.
You know, and they made a sling for him.
Mm-hmm.
Cap one on each end. You carried it over your shoulder the same way they made a sling for that base plate.
Mm-hmm.
But you take, you know, if you're in the grunts, you got a 30-pound pack on your back at that time, at my time.
Mm-hmm.
Got a helmet, 3 or 4 pounds. You got a full belt of ammo.
Mm-hmm.
You got a rifle, 9.5 pounds. You got a bayonet, 1.5 pounds. You got a couple of grenades, you know.
Mm-hmm.
All of this adds up. Then you put a base plate. Then you put a tube. Then you put a radio with an extra battery. Then you put a coil of wire.
Mm-hmm.
These guys were loaded down going into combat.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that was the thing I'd asked another veteran years later. He said, "Oh, toting a recoilless was not so, no, yeah, the bazooka." He said, "That wasn't too bad. It was the other 15 or 20 guys that had to tote extra ammo for me, because I'm only toting the gun. But he's toting 2, and he's toting 2, and he's toting 2, and he's toting 2. And everybody wanted to open up with a bazooka. You know, let's get rid of this ammo."
Yeah, they had a vest fit that 3 rounds went in
Yeah.
for each man to put on and carry here. And I often thought, you know, if he caught a bullet here, there ain't going to be much of him left.
And so everybody volunteered. "Here you go. Use mine. First one."
Used to do that with mortar shells. I'm going to tell you, we carried a little 60 mortar, which is called a company commander's artillery.
Yeah.
And everybody, including the company commander, carried a mortar shell on his back.
Yeah.
And when we get into a fight and they start popping that, everybody ran up with their shell to get that little 2 or 3 pounds off.
Oh yeah. Volunteer, no problem. Here you go, sir.
Yeah.
Be glad to load it for you, sir. Yeah, I can see that.
There's a lot of knowledge in this room.
Mm-hmm.
I've read every book once, a lot of them many times.
Mm-hmm.
The only fiction I have in here is those paperbacks right there, and they're on subjects I'm interested in. All the rest of it is good stuff. Most of it is hardbound.
Now you knew or served in country at the same time as R. Lee Ermey.
Oh yeah.
You know.
Yeah, he was staff sergeant.
He was staff sergeant. So.
Got medically retired.
And then there were Dale Dye. You knew him.
Knew Dale. He was the captain when I saw him last.
Mm-hmm.
He was lieutenant and made captain yet. And he was in journalism.
Mm-hmm.
And he was out on the lines for it. I had a sergeant that worked for Stars and Stripes, and he loved my platoon. And we liked him because he always carried a demo bag full of grenades. And a big tall guy, and he could throw a grenade 60 yards like a baseball with accuracy. And we get in a firefight, and it was like our platoon had its own little artillery. And we kept him alive, and he kept us alive. He retired a master gunny.
Now, something you told me years ago that stuck with me. You talked about carrying honey in combat.
Oh yeah.
And that
Pint of honey.
when you were in Force Recon, somebody would.
If you had to run.
Well, yeah, but there was something y'all would do with coffee. One guy would start some way of heating, and you'd put a canteen cup and get the canteen. You'd add the honey to it and everything, and each guy took such and such and passed it around.
You passed around, everybody drank out of it.
Yeah, quick and easy. But I thought about that, carrying honey in the field for instant food, instant quick.
Yeah, and whiskey.
And whiskey.
Kept you from coughing.
Yeah.
Cut the phlegm out of your throat and coated them and gave you energy. In the same way when we made coffee. We'd sit there and make a cup of coffee. I'd get a sip or two. Company gunny would always stop by, get a radio man and get a couple of sips. Next thing you know, it's empty. But everybody got a little heat in them, you know. But now we carried honey when I was doing patrols and what have you. And if anything went wrong, you dropped everything but your jar of honey and a couple of magazines and ran. That honey would keep you going for 3 or 4 days. And those magazines would either get you killed or keep you alive. And till you could get to somebody.
But now, like, so you carried LBE, and that stayed on you. And so you had your other stuff, when you were doing Force Recon and stuff, your main rucksack, Alice pack, whatever, you carried the stuff. You
It had
consider
a quick
that,
release on it.
you just dump it and run.
Drop it.
If they came at, your job was never to pull a trigger. If you pulled a trigger, something screwed up.
If you pull the trigger, they knew you were there and your mission was over. Now try to get out alive.
So dump it and run.
Right, the whole thing was to get in and get the information. Nobody was there. I went to dirt school because of that.
Dirt school.
Dirt school.
All right.
Went down to the engineers, and what you do is you take 50 pounds of dirt, and you got these 6 dish, and they got screens in the bottom, and each one gets progressively smaller. And you take a 50 and you put up there, and you shake it down through all of them, and the percentage of each that catches will tell the engineers if that dirt will hold up tanks, if it'll hold up planes, or if it ain't gonna hold up nothing. Well, if you go out there and you dig up 50 pounds of dirt every 100 feet for a mile, somebody's gonna see those holes. But if you dig it up at night and you do that, your team all the way down, and put the dirt back, nobody notices it. And you got the information.
Well, I remember hearing about
Yeah.
reading about the frogmen that went in at D-Day to test the beaches, see what was underwater, you know.
Attach explosives to them if they could.
Yeah, things like that. I remember recently saw a documentary about it was a screwball bunch of guys that really did not give a damn. But they were pilots on, pilot and crew on a B-29, or maybe it been a B-17. But anyway, it'd be B-29, excuse me.
In the Pacific, it was a B-29.
Okay.
In Europe, it was a B-17.
It was in the Pacific, and what it was, they took a bird that was sat to the side for parts because it was damaged, and they kind of reclaimed it because nobody wanted to fly with them. So they got their own bird, so to speak, and they volunteered for recon missions of photography. And it was some island that we were going to land on, and you got to, the way they rigged the cameras up in them was to get exact pictures down in the water. They wanted to see the coral reefs and all because the Marines are going to be landing on this damn thing. But you had to fly exactly flat and level at this certain altitude for like 20 minutes. And the island was occupied by Japs. And yet they went out there, and the documentary was talking about how every one of his guys had gone in and were, even though they were already trained, they went back and started from scratch to be gunners. He wanted every man on that bird to be an expert gunner, and they were. And they were shooting down Japs left or right, and that plane got hell shot. It's 666 is the name of the plane. Tail number was like 1666, and they just called it all the 666. But the reason I bring it up was when they got in trouble, they had 6 Japs on them, zeros, eating them up.
Sure.
And anybody sane would have veered off to get out of there, climb altitude. But the pilot talked about looking down at that water and thinking about the Marines got to land on that.
Sure.
This is worth this plane if we get it out of here. And so he stayed in there, and it did. It made a big difference because of it.
Well, you know that flat and level on a canoe up there in my day pack, I have a board this long and that wide, and there's 2 cheap carpenter's level. One runs this way, one's that way. And I would take it and put it on my funnel gunnel, perfectly level, so I could see it. And I would look down, and when I put my load in there and I got in there, my canoe was level from side to side and was level from bow to stern. And that meant simply by me shifting my weight or leaning without even using paddle, I could affect the direction of that canoe, and I knew it. And that's the way I loaded the canoe, and that's why that board was in there. But I started doing that in the boundary waters.
Well, you were the first one I ever seen do that, beyond that. When you first get in the canoe, after you've shoved off in the water, you put your hands down the side, you get centered up, and you rock the canoes with your butt cheeks. You break your spine loose, and you kind of, okay, and then after that, you're good. I was taught to do that by my granddaddy. He said, do the duck butt, because you get in, you're used to being stiff like that. But you'll sit down in that canoe, and if you float your hips up and down, you can angle the canoe so you're not having to paddle as much. Right. It's not flat like, you can't do it on a john boat with a flip. You got to shift in a john boat to do it. But sitting in a canoe, you could actually roll one hip up and one down or whatever and get it to lean so that keel would help cut and curve, and you could intensify and stuff. And I remember we went to Pigeon Creek and was putting in, and you put in first, and that was the first time I can recall us ever canoeing. And looked up, and I seen you do that, and you sat there and you did that, and you rocked it. And I thought, hell, he's doing the duck butt like I do. Well, that was the only person I'd ever seen do the duck butt besides me.
Something else I did is the flotation device that everybody sits on. I took one and put it down where my toes were. And if I got into a rough area, or if I got into an area with a log across the creek, I could immediately drop down on my knees without skinning them up, because I wore shorts almost year round.
Some of them fiberglass canoes was
Right.
kind of rough on the
And
inside.
I could drop down on my knees and put my butt against that seat,
Mm-hmm.
and using the paddle still have full control of my canoe.
Mm-hmm.
Because there was a young man from Spain back when we were taking in kids and all.
I remember, yeah.
Right. And we went down through Hells of Poppin'.
Mm-hmm.
Water's very fast, whole creek funneled into an area 30 feet wide at most.
Mm-hmm.
And when we got there, there was a log down across it, about 3 feet above the water. I hollered at him, "Duck!"
Mm-hmm.
He looks up and looks around for the ducks, and I saw the log catch him, and when I went under the log, he was hanging on to it.
Yeah.
I got his canoe and walked back up the creek and
Yeah.
got off and told him, I said, "Boy, you gotta learn to speak English."
I remember I want to say it was this time of year. It was early spring. You, me, and Larry put in on Pigeon Creek, and that was the time that the otter was playing around.
Oh yeah,
The baby
coming
otter
up and fussing at me for being
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
had the baby raccoons up in the trees. We saw ducks. We saw a geese. There was one geese. We went through Hells of Poppin'. I remember the foam along the edge of the Hells of
Mhm.
Poppin'. And then there was the big old turtles. There was the otters.
Oh, a lot of those little river turtles,
Oh,
both
yeah.
the hard and the soft shell.
Yeah. And then whenever we had that buck, that he was standing there and turning and looking, and you're just cruising by, silent, sitting there smoking and looking at him. He didn't even know whether to run or whatever. I remember he was no more than 20 feet from him, big buck. And Francis just looked up and took his pipe and kind of poked the stem at him like, "You," and you saw his ears twitch like, "What are you doing?" Now, of course, once he looked up and saw me and Larry, he was gone. But he wasn't even scared of him. Like, "What are you doing?" Like, "Morning." Oh, yeah.
The two most unusual things I saw on the creek.
Mm-hmm.
I came down one day and I thought it was a snake.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw this above the creek.
Mm-hmm.
And I motioned Larry over, and we never talked. We always whispered. And I pointed it out to him. We eased down there, and when we got closer, it walked out of the water, and it was a turkey killing the lice, drowning them.
Oh, yeah,
And it
okay.
walked out, and the wings were dragging the sand.
Yeah,
Couldn't fly, and it walked off into the woods.
yeah.
And the other thing is when they still held dog hunting in that area,
Mm-hmm.
I watched this buck run down the hill, jump into the canoe, and swim around the corner. And then I didn't hear him. So when Larry got close, I motioned him over and I whispered in his ear, "When we round this corner, you're going to see something nobody else will probably ever see." We got around the corner, and the deer was laying down in the water with only his head showing, no scent for the hounds.
Mm-hmm.
The hounds had already come down, saw where the deer went in the water, swam across the creek, and took off on that side.
Mm-hmm.
Then when the deer got up and ran, being soaking wet, he is no longer shedding that 1,500 pieces of dry skin a minute to float in the air.
Mm-hmm.
He was safe.
Yeah.
But that's the two most unusual things I had seen water related.
Mm-hmm. Now this is the creek where they found that saber-toothed tiger tusk
Right.
at.
Sent it off to Auburn and had it
And
verified.
it was in your swimming hole where I pulled that hunk off the bottom. We were building the wall, and that was a perfect three-toed track, and I thought it was a dinosaur track, and Auburn looked at it and said, "No, wrong time period, it was a terror bird." Which one
Yeah,
of them
I remember that.
7 foot tall with a parrot beak meat eater that used to chase what would become humans around.
Right.
But I donated that to Auburn. They got that up there somewhere.
Well, you know, up at the cabin I had a rack with stuff we picked up. I had petrified poop,
Mm-hmm. Coprolites.
yeah, shells,
Mm-hmm.
tracks,
Mm-hmm.
that saber tooth, because we found 12 of those tiger
Mm-hmm.
tusk.
Saber-tooth tiger tusk. They rode out of the bank. It's a rock layer right there, and it's right there at that layer. Probably got killed. Well, of course, it got killed off 12,800 years ago at the Younger Dryas, because that's when they went extinct.
Yeah.
So that's what that layer is right there, and it's right there at that layer is where we find them. Oh yeah.
The other stuff found up there is I was digging down. Well, I saw it on the bank where it washed. You know, right there at the campsite. We have the campsite, and then you go down 5 feet, and then there's the plain there. Well, in that 5 feet going down, I saw all of this burned area, and went over and dug it out, and found a silver coin, French, from the 1700s, about 1760s, and a broken pipe. Found the bowl and found the very end of it, but did not find the middle of the stem. And of course, I gave them to my brother, who had a real good collection. Excuse me. And he went looking for that stem. I showed him where I found it. Dug and never found it. It had probably washed away when the water was high.
Or the reason it got chucked in the fire pit, it may have got broke, or he may have needed that tube for something and throw the other parts in the fire.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Because they made of clay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's like Jeff Cross ordered a big batch of sand for his kids
I remember that.
to make a sandbox, and was out there going through it and found these container, and it was French trade beads from the 1700s.
Yeah.
And some Frenchman, for some reason, had to leave those on a sandbar, and over a period of time they had gotten buried. And then, of course, a front end loader went out there and
Scooped
dug
up a big
them
thing
up.
of sand and dumped it.
Yeah, and he beaded all kinds of stuff with those authentic beads. And,
And a lot of that stuff is so much
because,
history.
you know, the largest Indian battle in the history of the United States with whites took place in Alabama at Fort Mims, the 31st of August, 1813.
They
that
walked
led to
into that fort. You couldn't even close the gates to the fort. It was a trade post, wasn't it?
Right, it was trading post, and the major in charge, all of his people were drunk. They were weekend volunteer warriors, and so he hadn't got on them, straightened them up. Sand had blocked the gate over a period of time. My grandmother McGowan's family, she was an earl, E-A-R-L-E. Her daddy and mother and 4 or 5 daughters came down to Fort Mims that morning. All the soldiers were drunk. He got back on his flatboat about 10 o'clock and shoved off for Mobile with his girls. At 11 o'clock the Indians hit. Now that area was full of Tories. After and the earls were Tories. After the Red War, a lot of the Tories out of Georgia and South Carolina had to get away from everybody who now was a patriot. Even though 1/3 of them wasn't, and 1/3 was Tories, 1/3 didn't care, and 1/3 was patriots. They had to get away from them, and they came to the swamp country in South Alabama and South Mississippi and settled in there. And that area was a Tory settlement.
Now, one thing we're probably going to need to end this pretty quick because I got to edit
Sure.
humps, but I want to bring this up. Something that you pointed out to me was that there is a fault line on all the rivers and creeks in lower Alabama.
Everywhere.
I had been across this line a couple of times, but I never realized what it was until he pointed this out.
Right.
So talk about that a second.
Okay, your topo maps show it. In 1811, Tecumseh, who was trying to raise all the Indians against the white man at one time, came down to the creeks, Creek Indian Nation, and told them that he was going to make the rivers run backwards. God knows why. Of course, he had a shaman brother who had told him about this.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a tremendous earthquake, and all of the earth dropped about 5 feet, and the rivers ran backwards.
Mm-hmm.
If you take the topo maps and across part of South Georgia, all the way across to Alabama, and into Mississippi,
Mm-hmm.
you can almost draw a straight line across the rivers, and it will list there falls.
Mm-hmm. That's the fault
That's
line,
it.
falls or some sort of rapids
Yeah,
or
it's
whatever.
It's a fault line from the earthquake that Tecumseh
New
predicted.
Madrid earthquake. Yeah, 1811.
Oh, that's when he predicted. I don't know when the earthquake was.
1811, what it was,
Yeah.
New Madrid earthquake.
Yeah.
Centered in New Madrid,
Isn't that
Missouri.
neat though how Alabama is just, I love this state.
Oh, I do too.
I really do.
I
We
do.
were the first state to have public TV.
Yes.
We were the first state to have 911 emergency call, and the very first one ever made was in this state. And that was a representative to see if it was working.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just, this state has done so much to be so backwards in other ways.
Well, that's true. But hey, you know, it's Alabama. God love it.
Well, at least they've got a football team, you know.
Yep, they do
Right.
have two really good, actually we got several really good football teams.
Yes,
in the
we
state.
do. Yes, we do.
You like me. You cheer for Alabama, I cheer for Auburn, but we both agree. We cheer for all the Alabama
Oh, yeah.
teams.
Yeah, there's
Troy
only,
State, whatever.
yeah, there's only one time that I did not want a team from Alabama to win, and that's when they played the university.
Yeah, down
Right.
the Iron Bowl.
And other than that, I want us to dominate. I
Yeah.
want us to whoop them Philistines with the ass end of a jawbone.
That's
Or is
it.
it the jawbone of an ass?
Something like
Anyway,
that.
I want them all to know that they've come to the promised land. The land of milk and honey, of flintlock rifles,
There you go.
homemade whiskey.
There you go. Well, guys, thank you very much for watching. I'm going to have to call it there because I can only edit such a big file. And I've already got to break this in half. But we will do more of these in the future. Grouch, thank you very much,
Oh,
brother.
maybe next time I'll show them how to make a steel in the sink and on the stove.
No.
Remember Uncle Dog's
I
stories?
know. We're not doing that. We're not going to lead them to temptation. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a great day.